Has the era of independent American decision-making ended? Is this the end of the American empire? At the moment when the world was waiting for the signing of a historic agreement in Pakistan, something unexpected happened. Netanyahu intervenes at the last moment, turns the tables on Trump, and drags the region into a scenario of total blockade. Today, I will reveal to you how and why America turned this conflict from war to blockade. And I will reveal to you why Iran is betting that this blockade will be the final nail in the coffin of the American empire. Stay with us. Dear viewers, peace be upon you and God's mercy and blessings, and welcome back today, God willing, to this episode of the Opinion Series, which we always dedicate to following the latest developments in this war taking place in the Middle East between Iran and the Epstein Alliance. It's clear. Dear viewers, as I explained to you in one of the previous episodes, even if the American President Trump really wants to stop this war, Netanyahu will never allow him to do so. During the negotiations that took place in Pakistan, things were moving very quickly toward an agreement. All the indicators suggested that an agreement was indeed coming and that a new phase was about to begin in the Middle East. Even Iran's foreign minister, Abbas Araghchi, made a statement after these negotiations failed, saying that America changed its demands at the last moment. Therefore, it was America that caused this agreement to fail. This means that there were American demands, and in return, there were Iranian conditions, and everything was agreed upon. They were very close to reaching a historic agreement, but the Americans backed out at the last moment and presented other demands that were impossible according to the Iranians. So, the Americans backing out at the last moment is really strange. There are a lot of questions, especially since the war and its continuation are not in America's interest. They do not serve American interests or help maintain those interests in the region. It's clear that Netanyahu really controls Trump's fate, and as a result, he imposes whatever he wants on him. He pressured him at the last moment, causing Trump to change his stance and present new demands to the Iranians, demands that serve Israeli interests. It's also clear, dear viewers, that these points which were the subject of disagreement between the Iranians and the Americans are really just one or three specific points. One point is related to the nuclear issue, another concerns the Strait of Hormuz, and the third is about the American military presence. In the beginning, there was an agreement that Iran would return to the 2015 nuclear deal, and Iran agreed to that, in exchange for the US recognizing Iran's right to enrich uranium on its own soil. But then the US came up with another demand, asking Iran to completely dismantle its nuclear program by stopping uranium enrichment on its own soil, so Iran refused that. Iran refuses any restrictions on its nuclear program and even rejects the proposal of not exporting enriched uranium to any other country. Iran says that just like France, Russia, Germany, the Netherlands, Britain, and so on, countries that export enriched uranium, it also has the right to export enriched uranium for peaceful use to all countries in the world. And as everyone knows, this is a trade that brings in significant revenues for countries, possibly amounting to billions of dollars. Iran even rejects this condition, because it truly wants to generate revenue from enriched uranium on its own soil by supplying many countries that have nuclear power plants with enriched uranium. Some countries, like France for example, support Israeli demands to strip Iran of enriched uranium for this very reason, so that Iran does not enter the international competition over nuclear fuel. These countries want to maintain their dominance in this field, so they can always impose exorbitant prices on anyone who wants to build a nuclear power plant, and so they can enforce, meaning this would be a long-term condition, that nuclear fuel must be purchased exclusively from them for many years, especially so that everyone knows that the profits these countries make from enriched uranium are not just financial profits, but even more than that. They gain power, influence, and political leverage so that the energy security of a certain country ends up in the hands of France, Britain, America, or others. They control it as they wish, and they always use it as a tool of political blackmail. Entering this field will break these schemes and this monopoly. Getting enriched uranium will become easy, available in the markets, not subject to political blackmail and so on. As a result, the world will have another alternative. And so they absolutely do not want this. And that's why there are parties that, in one way or another, support this Israeli proposal that Iran must be stripped of uranium enrichment on its own soil. The second point of disagreement was the agreement that Iran would open the Strait of Hormuz, but on the condition that America recognizes Iran's control over the strait and acknowledges Iran's rights. Imposing fees on ships, fees specifically for securing the strait, but America believes that it should collect these fees. America wants the region to always be under its protection, with America enforcing it so that its military ships might escort the oil tankers in exchange for fees paid by these tankers. There was a proposal, maybe it wasn't on the table for discussion, maybe it was on the table for discussion, there are no confirmations. A proposal that there would be an American-Iranian partnership that would jointly secure the strait, meaning the fees would be shared. But it's clear that Iran also rejects this proposal. America refuses to allow Iran this right in the Strait of Hormuz for two reasons. The first reason is that they believe Iran will make huge amounts of money from this strait, and this money will make Iran stronger and stronger, and Iran might even grow to become a global superpower. At that point, it will be impossible to confront it in future conflicts. And the second reason is that this right will give Iran the opportunity to inspect ships in the region. This means Iran will know about all the weapons and military equipment being delivered. These countries in the region, the smaller Gulf states, like the Emirates, Kuwait, Bahrain, and Qatar, and in addition to that, it will be impossible at that point for the US Fifth Fleet, which is stationed in Bahrain, to leave the Persian Gulf without Iran's permission. For example, in the event of war, another war that could possibly be against China or against any other country in the region or any other country in the world, maybe in the Horn of Africa or elsewhere, at the very least. Iran will make a decision to close the Strait of Hormuz to military ships, meaning it will trap the Fifth Fleet in the Gulf. That's why America has this concern. The third point also concerns Iran's demand to remove American military bases from the region, which means ending the era of protection in the Gulf region. But it's clear that it's not only America that rejects this Iranian demand. The Gulf countries themselves reject this demand and oppose an American military withdrawal from the region, despite everything that has happened. And we believe that this Iranian condition is probably just a negotiating point, and Iran might be willing to give it up because these American military bases in the region have become exposed. Today, they are a burden on America. Instead of being military bases that pose a threat to the countries of the region, they have now become a burden on America. This means that today America has to make a huge effort just to protect these bases from missile strikes and Iranian drones. That's why I believe that in reality, keeping these military bases in the region actually benefits Iran, because at the very least, it gives them exposed and precisely identified targets to strike. So if any aggression comes from them, considering, as everyone knows, there is of course a great geographical distance between Iran, Iranians, and America. It's difficult to strike American territory now with missiles, given the current ranges that Iran's missiles have. Maybe in the coming years, Iran will have missiles that can reach American soil, but right now they don't have that capability. It's necessary for these American bases to remain in the region so they can be exposed and precisely identified targets, allowing Iran to always have a deterrent force against these military bases. So now, after the failure of this first round of negotiations, there might be a second round, but before that round. Today, America is trying to put some pressure on Iran so that it gives in and gives up any of its demands. And every time Iran gives up a certain demand, it will also be asked to give up another demand. This is well known. They always do this. Now it's clear that we are entering a new phase, a phase where they want to economically strangle Iran while ensuring that war does not break out again. This means that America has now reached a stage where it is unable to continue the war. The war against Iran has become pointless. It now plays in Iran's favor because it's a war of attrition that drains America's military capabilities, which it will need in major conflicts against China or Russia or elsewhere. That's why now it wants to start a new phase away from war, beginning a phase of economically strangling Iran, imposing a naval blockade on Iran similar to the blockade imposed on Venezuela for many weeks. In fact, President Trump announced this. He announced the start of an operation to impose a similar naval blockade on Iran, similar to that, and he thinks that Iran is Venezuela or that Iran is Cuba. He believes that strangling the Iranian economy will make it submit to these American demands. And he thinks that stopping Iranian oil exports to China will make China put pressure on Iran until it submits to the American demands. But in reality, the situation is completely different. The first thing we notice is that the Iranian response came quickly. What did Iran say? Iran said that a naval blockade on Iran would mean a similar blockade on all the countries of the Persian Gulf. In other words, anything Iran suffers from, they will also suffer from. Gulf countries like the UAE, Qatar, Bahrain, and so on, if ships are prevented from reaching Iranian ports, ships will also be prevented from reaching the ports of the Gulf countries. The second thing is that this blockade would actually be a blockade that would hit the whole world, because now the international prices of energy, like oil and gas, would rise to unbelievable levels. That means extremely high levels, and every day of this blockade would be another day of further price increases. What Trump always feared in this war is exactly what will happen. Oil prices will exceed $150 per barrel, and may even reach over $200 per barrel. As a result, the world is heading toward a very serious inflation crisis, and all prices without exception will rise. The Iranian parliament speaker Kalibaf said in a post that the American people will long for the time when gasoline prices in America were $4 or $5. This means that after this happens, prices will rise dramatically. And of course, this will harm Trump and the Republican Party, especially today as we are approaching the date of the US midterm congressional elections, which will be in November. This means that Trump's popularity inside America will collapse more and more with each day of this blockade. The third point is also that Iran's geographic location is not the same as the geographic location of Venezuela or Cuba. That means if the sanctions and blockade that America imposed on Cuba or Venezuela were successful and caused an internal crisis and made the country live through a social disaster. That may be true of those countries, but Iran is not like that. Iran manufactures almost everything locally, and Iran has land borders with a number of countries, which means it can get everything it needs through these countries. It has borders with Turkey, it has borders with Pakistan, it has borders with Afghanistan and with Turkmenistan, and it has access through these countries. It has land routes that reach China and India directly, and it also has the Caspian Sea, which connects it directly to Russia. So Iran is not like Venezuela, which is originally located in the Americas, and which already has problems with all its neighboring countries like Guyana and Colombia. Iran is not like Cuba, which is an island to begin with. That means it's very easy to blockade it by sea, because it's an island. So the American success that happened in Cuba or in Venezuela cannot be repeated, cannot succeed at all with Iran. The fourth point is that today we are only witnessing threats from Trump, just threats. Will Trump actually be able to carry out this threat? That's another matter, and it requires more details. For example, will Trump be able, for instance, to seize Chinese oil tankers that are carrying Iranian oil? This will remain an open question because the blockade imposed by America is an illegal blockade, a blockade that did not come from the United Nations Security Council. Legally, it has no right to seize or stop ships just because they are transporting oil from a certain country. So we'll see what China's response will be. Will China allow this farce to happen near it in its own region? What will China's response be? We will see. The interesting thing today is that this conflict represents a real test for the whole world. Now, for very many decades, for the first time, this question is being raised. Are we really at a historical turning point, similar to what happened when the European empires collapsed in 1956? For example, during the Suez Canal crisis, the old colonial powers, France and Britain, collapsed because of what? Because of the Suez Canal crisis. They suffered a strategic defeat there, under pressure from the United States and the Soviet Union. Now perhaps we are facing another crossroads, almost identical. America is experiencing a strategic defeat in another important waterway, and this is happening under Chinese and Russian pressure, and perhaps also under European pressure. This raises the question, will this crisis be the reason for the end of the American empire as well? We're talking specifically about the end of the petrodollar era, because once the petrodollar era ends, the American empire will come to an end. This is a pressing question right now. It's clear that the blockade will have the opposite effect. It will end up isolating Trump and the American economy, not Iran. And let's not forget that there's another trump card Iran will use at the right time, namely the closure of the Bab al-Mandab Strait by the Sana government in Yemen. The situation with Iran is completely different. Trump is now moving toward a new strategy, economically strangling Iran instead of continuing a war of attrition that exhausts the American side more and more. But this strategy will not be successful with Iran at all, and it will have very serious consequences for America. So now we will see how things develop in the next few hours, and God willing, we will return to this topic. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the like button. Peace, mercy, and blessings of God be upon you. See you next time.